Wednesday. A little bit of brightness here and there, but also the chance that the cloud could just about be thick enough to produce the odd drizzly shower. And still we have this thicker cloud in the northwest, and that will gradually start to move its way southeastwards later on Wednesday, but more especially through Thursday and Friday. So overnight Wednesday, we can see that weather front continuing to make very slow progress south and eastwards. Otherwise, it's more of the same. Quite a lot of cloud around, a few breaks in that cloud, a little bit of mist and fog developing, and again, not particularly cold underneath that cloud. So for Thursday, we do start to see this weather front making slightly more progress southeastward. So for Thursday, it's mainly still the north and west of the UK that bears the brunt of the thicker cloud with outbreaks of rain, and that makes its way southeastwards on Friday, gradually clearing during the weekend. Bye for now.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
This is Mark Dolan looking after the show for the great Mark Steyn, who returns on Monday. In a busy programme, will Liz Truss's gamble on tax cuts pay off? I'll speak to David Maddox, political editor of the Express newspaper online. Should we be sending billions of pounds to Ukraine during a cost of living crisis at home? We'll speak to the chair of the House of Commons Select Committee on Defence, Tobias Ellwood, who says yes, and top journalist Lewis Brackpool from the popular news website Rebel News, who says no. Just what happened in Leicester this weekend and why? Does the violence there demonstrate that multiculturalism has failed? I'll be getting the views of broadcaster and commentator Maya Toosey. Plus, another shocking attack on free speech from big tech in the United States. Toby Young's popular Daily Skeptic newspaper, which dares to criticise COVID measures, and the Free Speech Union, which protects just that, well, they've both been defunded by US payment giant PayPal. Toby joins us later in the show to tell us why. Also, are green policies causing worldwide hunger? We'll speak to the brilliant US investigative journalist Natalie Winters. Lots to get through, and I want to hear from you throughout the programme. GBviews at gbnews.uk. And at the end of the show, I'll be taking your questions. Normally, it's Stump the Steyn. Well, tonight, I'd like you to drill Dolan. Any questions for me? Then drop me a line right now. GBviews at gbnews.uk for drill Dolan, a term that could be misconstrued, but then that's the story of my life. We'll be kicking off with my big opinion monologue in 2 minutes' time. I'm backing Liz Truss to make Britain great again. I'll see you after the headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Good evening, it's 8:01. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says the UK's security can't be jeopardised for the sake of cheap energy. Liz Truss, who's pledged at least £2.3 billion in military aid to Ukraine next year, says the West must continue to stand up to Russian aggression. She and world leaders will discuss the war at the UN General Assembly, which is currently underway in New York. Meanwhile, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres took aim at energy companies as he addressed the General Assembly, accusing them of claiming huge profits while people and the planet pay the price.
It's high time to put fossil fuel producers, investors and enablers on notice. Polluters must pay. And today I'm calling on all developed economies to tax the windfall profits of fossil fuel companies. Those funds should be redirected in two ways: to countries suffering loss and damage caused by the climate crisis, and to people struggling with rising food and energy prices.
The Prime Minister is also due to hold bilateral talks with the world leaders at the two-day event in New York. Ms Truss has admitted that negotiations for a post-Brexit free trade deal with the US won't restart for years. President Joe Biden stalled trade negotiations after expressing concern that the Northern Ireland Protocol could damage the peace process. Downing Street says the UK and France will enhance cooperation on energy to cut costs for households. The Prime Minister and French President Emmanuel Macron have made this agreement while underscoring the importance of working together to end reliance on Russian energy and strengthen energy security. Western leaders have condemned plans by Russia to hold referendums in 4 Moscow-held regions of Ukraine. The Kremlin says voting will be held this coming weekend. The deputy head of Russia's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, says the outcome of the votes would be irreversible. Ukraine and the West say they'll not acknowledge any vote or outcome. In other news, more travel disruption is expected with the RMT union announcing new rail strikes on the 1st of October. The 24-hour walkout is the latest round of industrial action in an ongoing row over job security, pay and working conditions. Union officials say the move will bring the railway to an effective standstill. It comes as members of the ASLEF union announced train drivers across 12 companies will strike on the 1st and the 5th of October. TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Mark.
OK, folks, it's time to crack on and get Britain moving. The wonderful send-off of our late, great Her Majesty the Queen was a brief respite from what is, in no uncertain terms, a national crisis. Soaring inflation, spiralling energy bills, union wage demands, a cancer backlog in the NHS, knife crime in our great cities, burglaries through the roof, a backlog of court cases so massive our criminal justice system is effectively on pause, a generation of kids still playing catch-up at school, thanks to, in my view, needless school closures. Oh, and there's a small matter of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is artificially spiking the cost of oil and gas. But Britain, as we've discovered in the last few days, with the global event that was the Queen's funeral, is a country that always has and always will punch above its weight. We like a challenge. It happened when we saw off the existential threat of Nazism in Europe, and when we rebuilt a broken economy and a broken country post-war. We emerged from the 1970s, a decade of stagnation, debt and industrial strife, into the economic boom of the 1980s, and we won a war against Argentina to boot. We survived the recession of the early 90s, which was paired with a housing market crash and interest rates at 15%. And we even shrugged off the credit crunch in 2008 with the tough love policies of the then coalition government under David Cameron, taking the deficit as a percentage of GDP from an eye-watering 11% to a far healthier 2% in just a few years. We bounced back then and we'll do it again. And then not in spite of Brexit, but because of it. Notwithstanding anger and disappointment for some at the undemocratic dispatch of Boris Johnson from Number 10, I like the optics of a new Prime Minister and a new King with which to tackle our greatest challenges to date. The epic tale of these islands turns a new chapter, and whilst a few of the pages might keep you awake at night, there's no reason not to anticipate a happy ending. It's clear what our exciting new Prime Minister Liz Truss wants to do. She wants to go for growth. Now, be clear, tax cuts during a recession is a colossal gamble, one that Rishi Sunak, remember him, advised against. I've been wildly critical of all of the borrowing over the last 2.5 years for what was, in my view, the failed experiment of lockdown. However, borrowing to subsidise energy bills for the next 2 years was essential, and on that, Liz Truss has acted with remarkable speed. The new Business Secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who means business, is going to set out how companies will be helped tomorrow. He has said his department will be the department for growth. And further borrowing to stimulate the economy and to spark investment is, in my view, a gamble worth taking. I'm persuaded by Truss that high taxes will just burden businesses and preclude consumer spending. Higher taxes will almost certainly lead to a deeper and longer recession, and with the potential flight of capital and talent, with companies and individuals running for the hills to escape high-tax Britain. It will be a race to the bottom. Jeremy Corbyn warned that post-Brexit Britain risked becoming Singapore-on-Sea, a low-tax haven. Now, he meant that as an insult. I consider it a sensible aspiration. Bring it on. We want the world's largest companies here, creating jobs, building their HQs here, and contributing to the tax take. And don't forget, the mathematics of taxation is a counterintuitive dark art. As our new PM pointed out recently, the last time we cut corporation tax, in 2017, we attracted more revenue into the exchequer because more companies wanted to base themselves in Britain. And more companies wanted to invest in Britain too. And whilst a windfall tax on energy companies makes sense on paper and grabs the headlines, what's the reality? The perception of Britain as a country that will raid your coffers whenever you have a few productive years. The reality is I'd love to see the energy companies paying more because they have enjoyed an unexpected gold rush. But that's how it goes. Businesses and industries have good times and bad. And the British government is effectively in partnership with energy companies in order to secure future energy supply via not just fossil fuels like oil and gas, but renewables too. This investment in future energy supplies costs billions. The energy companies are well within their rights to curtail this long-term investment if they get clobbered by the Treasury. So what do you want? A populist policy that raises a few million to satisfy the leader writers at the Mirror and the Guardian? Or a policy that establishes Britain as a consistently low-tax economy, a safe place to invest, and in the case of energy companies, one with a realistic and long-term plan to boost energy supplies? New Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget is coming on Friday, and it will establish the predominant theme that this government is keen to set. It's all about growth. Now, why does that matter? Because growth, as a result of higher GDP, increases the government's overall revenue, giving Britain the firepower to invest in public services, to police our streets, to pay for defence, schools and everything else beyond. In short, I'm giving our new Prime Minister the benefit of the doubt. Her policies are bold and yes, they're a gamble. But my gut tells me that's the way to go. And we've had some brutal honesty from the PM today, saying that a US trade deal is effectively off the table, mainly due to the Britain-hating incumbent at the White House, Mr. Forgetful himself, Joe Biden. Now, this kind of honesty and straight talking is exactly what the country needs if it's going to rebuild. The trade deal will come once we've got a US president that doesn't have a chip on his shoulder about this country. So there's one other commitment that we need from our ballsy new Prime Minister, who seems refreshingly willing to be unpopular, a genius and rare political quality enjoyed by her heroine, Margaret Thatcher. With terrifying public health figures like communist behavioural science expert Susan Michie calling once again for COVID measures, Liz Truss must commit to no COVID restrictions this winter. No, no, no. Do you think our economy, punch-drunk from 2.5 years of lockdowns, can withstand any more disruption? Boris Johnson pretended to be a libertarian but folded to SAGE over mask mandates, vaccine mandates, and Boris was even going to cancel Christmas last year before Sunak, Frost and Rees-Mogg stepped in. Liz Truss must be our first anti-lockdown Prime Minister. And for businesses to know that they can go into the winter able to trade, able to employ people, invest and serve their clients and customers with no threat of any COVID measures whatsoever, business sentiment will soar. So a combination of low taxes, support for energy bills, policies that reduce inflation and a commitment to keep Britain open this winter will prove, I believe, a heady mix. Far from being a crisis, if we go for growth, the sky's the limit. And as we were yesterday at the Queen's incredible funeral, we will once again be the envy of the world. By being bold, by being brave, by being occasionally unpopular, by having a vision, by standing by her principles, it's just possible that Liz Truss will make Britain great again. What's your view? Can Liz Truss make Britain great again? GB Views at gbnews.uk. I'll get to your views after the break. But joining me now to unpack this is David Maddox, political editor of The Express Online. Good evening, David.
Hi there, Mark.
It's a full in-tray, and it appears that Liz Truss is being rather bold in her policies.
Yes, actually, she's been refreshingly honest and refreshingly straightforward. In fact, in some ways, it's a pity that, obviously it was a great pity about the Queen's passing and things, but one of the things that we've lost in this is this kind of race out of the traps that we saw from Liz Truss with the whole energy bill announcement. But also that I go back to that first Prime Minister's questions of hers where Keir Starmer thought he was going to trap her with the windfall tax nonsense. And she just stood up and said, no, I'm not going to do it because it's anti-growth and I want this country's economy to grow. And she's absolutely right, by the way. I mean, it absolutely needs to happen. We can't just keep paddling water and mounting up debt and low economic growth.
Indeed, David, and she has resisted the headline-grabbing opportunity of a windfall tax. Is this a Thatcherite-style premier in the making, someone that's willing to make tough decisions that are not popular?
Well, we all remember Margaret Thatcher saying no, no, no. And yes, I mean, that was certainly the case with Liz Truss. I mean, certainly if she wanted a quick hit in the polls to say she was going for a second windfall tax, would have probably helped her out a bit, but she's absolutely right. What you need to do is stand by the principles of your government and not go for quick headlines. If her principle of her government is to be conservative with a small c, to go for growth, to go for low tax, to get people to invest in this country and create jobs, to create wealth, which then feeds into our public services, she needs to stick by whatever is chucked at her. She needs to stick by these principles and certainly not go. I was just looking at the headlines there, actually, with the UN Secretary General trying to tell the Western countries, of course, it's always the Western countries, that they needed to impose these windfall taxes. Interestingly, I suspect he wasn't talking to Russia and China and others on that, she's got to resist people like that, and she's got to stick with her principles. And, that's how she won the leadership election against Sunak. And if she doesn't do that, I think she will be out.
I certainly agree with you on that. However, do you think lifting taxes from bankers' bonuses is an own goal and a gift to Labour?
No, I don't actually. I think in the short term it may well be seen as a gift to Labour, and it won't help her in the short term. But what she's done is lifted the limit on bonuses, actually. And, in the end, you want wealthy people to come to this country. You want people who are making money, creating wealth to come to this country. You want them here paying their taxes. There's a tax on bonuses. Well, if there's no limit on the bonuses, then, they're more likely to come here, spend their money here, and pay tax here. It's so obvious, actually, that, you wonder why there's even a debate about it.
And she'll have a role to play when those siren voices calling for COVID measures get louder in the winter months. Do you think she should stand firm? Should she be Britain's first properly lockdown sceptic Prime Minister? Should Britain adopt the policies of Sweden in the case of any case rises of COVID?
Yeah, well, I'm completely with you on that, Mark. I thought that the two-year lockdown, it really is the source of all our problems now, much more than the Ukraine war, which everybody's trying to blame. I mean, it was an absolute catastrophe. Well, I was working for the Sunday Express at the time, and we were virtually the only national paper holding out against this nonsense. And, she certainly got to resist that. I mean, the usual Marxists are trying to push the idea again. It's not based on public health. It's based on ideology. It's based on an idea that you control people and you have state economies. It won't work. It'll be a catastrophe for this country again. It may well, in the current circumstances, push us over the edge. I don't think personally, just speaking to people in Parliament and MPs, that she would have the support even if she wanted to do it. I think her party now are almost wholly against the idea of lockdowns.
The Express Online is a cracking read, informative and entertaining. Its political editor is David Maddox. David, thank you so much for your time. What do you think? GBViews at gbnews.uk. Should Liz Truss be Britain's first anti-lockdown Prime Minister? And what do you think about those tax cuts during a recession? A gamble worth taking? Will it pay off? What are your first impressions of Prime Minister Truss? Do let me know. Now, coming up, is it right to send billions to Ukraine when Brits are suffering a cost of living crisis at home? And what happened in Leicester this weekend and why? And what does it say about multiculturalism in the UK? And don't forget, the brilliant journalist Toby Young joins us later in the show with news of yet another attack on free speech by a US tech giant. It's a shocker, let me tell you. See you in 2.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England,
Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Well, a big reaction to my big opinion monologue. Will Liz Truss's gamble on tax cuts pay off? This from Patrick, who says, tough love over the 2008 economic crisis. The people who caused it were given golden parachutes. Also on multiculturalism, dear Mark, the aim of leftist ideology is to first destroy Western values, culture and the way of life, then to establish radical authoritarian change. Multiculturalism was always a Trojan horse that would help degrade the very fabric of our lives. We're facing dangerous times. That's from Dave. With strong views, keep them coming. GB Views at gbnews.uk. And we'll get to Ukraine very shortly. Somebody has tweeted into the programme and has said a very tiny minority of people agree with sending shed loads of cash to Ukraine. It's not acceptable. It's not democratic. It needs to stop immediately. Well, let's get straight to that story right now. New Prime Minister Liz Truss was back at work today and on her first international trip as Prime Minister has promised to commit £2.3 billion worth of military aid to Ukraine, matching the figure provided by the UK in the previous year. She made this announcement on a visit to a major UN summit in New York. So is this money well spent if it hastens the end of the war, or does it prolong the agony? And can sending billions abroad be justified at a time when so many Brits are struggling at home? To debate this, I'm delighted to welcome Conservative MP and Chair of the Defence Select Committee in the House of Commons, Tobias Ellwood, and the UK correspondent of the popular news website News Online, Rebel News, Lewis Brackpool. So let me start with you if I can, Lewis. Do you think it's justified to send billions to Ukraine when so many Brits are struggling?
It's quite simply no. Britons are going to have a very, very tough winter, to be totally honest. And this idea of this being a cost of living crisis, well, in fact, it's actually a cost of lockdown and a cost of this eco-fanaticism with green policies and these sanctions upon Russia, which is actually hurting ordinary people over oligarchs over in Russia. And this stigmatization of putting the British people first has sort of been running this course for quite a long time now, which I don't think it's a disgusting thing to say, that we should be putting our people first. And the famous quote, charity starts at home, should really be applied there.
However, we know, don't we, that Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as well as being a humanitarian crisis, Lewis, is artificially spiking the cost of global energy. So isn't this money well spent if it brings the war to a swift conclusion?
Well, according to figures that we rely on 4% actually of energy from Russia. So this idea of fueling and sending billions and billions of pounds, I think we're up to about 5 million pledged so far. I think the main question to ask is, where is this money going? I mean, we can't verify exactly where this is heading. So I think that would be more the appropriate question to ask, in my view.
Weaponry, manpower. Don't we want to see Putin defeated?
Absolutely, absolutely. But this is a war that we shouldn't be a part of, in my humble opinion. We're sending billions and billions of pounds and interfering with something that we, in my personal opinion, shouldn't be a part of, in my total honesty. I mean, we have so many problems in our backyard with inflation. The idea of going cashless very soon is a big concern. Of course, the energy crisis, like you mentioned, our open borders as well, where anyone can get into a dinghy from France and travel over to the UK. And of course, business owners are going to struggle to keep their doors open in the coming months. And the Tory government has mentioned this idea of this magic money tree that doesn't exist. But all of a sudden, we can now find the money to send to Ukraine, this bastion of democracy.
Tobias Ellwood, welcome to the programme. Should Britain be pledging £2.3 billion amid a cost of living crisis and towards a war that some are calling the forever war?
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear some of those views. I'm glad you pushed back a little bit. The idea that we live in isolation and that we can just turn our backs on what goes on in other parts of the world is for the birds. It really is. The reason why we have inflation here, the reason why there's a migration problem is because people are trying to get away from war zones and so forth. And if Britain doesn't step forward, as we've done in the past, and lead other like-minded nations, then these problems are only going to get bigger. The reason why food is so expensive in this country is because the grain can't get out of Ukraine. So the grain price, international grain prices have gone up. The reason why oil and gas is expensive is because it's not getting across Europe. That affects the entire gas and oil markets. And that's what's causing inflation in this country. I repeat, if we don't step forward, which nations will? You can't say, yes, I want Putin defeated. I want Putin outside of Ukraine and not be willing to step forward. That's a 1937 view of the world. I make it really, really clear. Our world is getting more dangerous and more complex. Democracies are on the decline. Authoritarianism is on the rise. And if we don't wake up and work with allies such as the United States and there's others that are in the UN right now meeting, then I'm afraid then we're in for a very bumpy decade indeed.
However, do we know, Tobias Ellwood, where this money is going? Is there accountability for these billions?
Of course there is, absolutely. We're not a country that simply throws money at another nation and not has any account for it. Part of my job on the Defence Select Committee is to make sure we see where this money is spent, how it's spent. Some of this money is training Ukrainians to do the fighting, being trained on Salisbury Plain. Others is more expensive and more complex weapon systems, which we're now seeing the result of. Guess what happened last week? A massive push by the brave Ukrainians in pushing Russia out. But I make it very, very clear, this won't stop in Ukraine. If we don't put this fire out in Ukraine, then Putin has every intention to spread his Slavic influence in other parts of Eastern Europe. And he is teaming up with China. This is the big change that we need to recognize, this access that is developing, that they've decided they've had enough of the international rules-based order, and they now want to exploit the differences and the problems and ensure that the West, in particularly the United States, remains weak. This is the world that we need to recognize and live in. This is the world that we need to stand up to. This is what Britain does. We lead on the international stage. We don't run away from our problems.
Lewis Brackpool, you've been doing Emily Maitlis-style eye rolls there. What's your view?
Well, I just think this idea, like I just mentioned, that a magic money tree never sort of existed, but all of a sudden we can now just pledge £5 billion to just a war miles and miles away when people are going to be struggling, like I've mentioned, this winter. And you can't verify where this money is actually being spent. And I mean, the Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine actually uploaded a video quite recently called Ukraine 2030, which showcases their idea of building this new Ukraine post-Russia-Ukraine war, where you're seeing a digital world, as they're calling it, without a bureaucracy, AI courts, everything is registered via your smartphone, everything is going cashless and paperless, school lessons are done online, e-health services, e-services via your smartphone, and every production facility has an ultra modern iron dome. So I don't see how you can basically sit there and say, let's pledge more money, £5 billion, as we've gotten to, and you can sit there and justify it when we can't verify exactly where it's going.
Tobias Ellwood, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I mean, astonishing to hear some very, very mixed messaging there, talking about issues which may be important, but completely irrelevant to what's going on in Ukraine. If you think things are expensive now, allow this war to continue. Allow Putin to continue on his adventurism, as I say, teaming up with China. Then things in Britain are going to get very, very difficult indeed. If we don't solve this energy crisis, then more of us are going to be in the dark, not just this winter and in the cold this winter, but further beyond that as well. We need to lean into our problems, not run away from them. And if you want to know where the money is spent, come to Parliament, sir. Come and listen to the debates. Come to my committee. Come and listen to how it's spent. This is what government, this is what Parliament does. We scrutinise what our government does to make sure every single penny is absolutely accounted for. And if it's not, then we make noises. We make sure that the government knows. So these bland suggestions that £5 billion is poorly spent, I'm afraid it's showing an ignorance of understanding of this, what we're discussing here today, I'm afraid, with respect to the other speaker.
Brief last word, Lewis?
Yeah, I just think it's just silly. I don't think it's a bad thing to say that we should be putting our own first. That's not a horrible thing to say. And remember, we've got so many things that we should be worrying about, not only just this winter time, but the impending happenings of this country. So, yeah, I just think it's poor.
Briefly, apologies, we've got the clock against us, Tobias Ellwood, but is this generosity, this largesse towards Ukraine, which you've argued is in the national self-interest, is it time limited? And also, is there a fiscal cap? I mean, will we still be pledging 2 or 3 billion a year in 10 years' time?
These are really important questions to ask, because, as I say, if we allow this war in Ukraine to spread, then yes, we're into another third, European, potentially global war. It'll be different from the last war, but that's where we're heading. And the idea that we can suddenly run away from this and just look after little England is really irresponsible in a major way. So let's work with our allies. Let's step forward and stand up to authoritarianism. Although, as I say, we're in for a very, very dark decade.
This show is all about opinions. Thanks for both of yours. Many thanks to Tobias Ellwood, Conservative MP and chair of the Defence Select Committee in the House of Commons, and Lewis Brackpool, journalist and UK correspondent for the popular news website Rebel News. Let's move on now. A man has been jailed for 10 months for his part in recent disorder in East Leicester. Of course, over the weekend, you saw the footage. Tensions involving mainly young men from sections of the Muslim and Hindu communities saw unrest on Saturday night. 25 officers and a police dog were injured, with 47 people arrested, according to police. Amos Norona, aged 20, pleaded guilty to possession of an offensive weapon. Leicestershire police said proactive patrols continued in East Leicester overnight, following the weekend disorder. Now, we've got some breaking news in the last hour. It's been confirmed that the disorder has now spread to Birmingham. More than 200 young Muslim men surrounded a Hindu temple in Smethwick tonight as tensions which brought violence to Leicester appear to have spread to the West Midlands. Organisers of the protest say it was launched in response to a decision by the temple to invite a controversial speaker to an event at the temple. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, says more than 200 young Muslims have surrounded a Hindu temple in Smethwick. So what happened in both cities and why? And what does it say about multiculturalism in modern Britain? To discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome political commentator and star of his own hugely popular channel on YouTube, Maya Toosey. Good evening, Maya.
Thank you very much for having me.
What happened in Leicester at the weekend and why?
There are 3 points to this. One, a lot of people have been saying, oh, it's only the last couple of days. This tension has actually been going for the past few weeks in Leicester. And as you said yourself, tonight has actually spread to Birmingham. These sort of tensions on a smaller scale has been going on for ages in certain parts of the country. Now, the problem with this, the 3 issues that we're dealing with. One is nothing to do with skin color. When we are complaining about this issue as Brits, we're not really talking about race in that sense. The problem we have is that, number one, the pace of migration over the last few decades in regards to the first wave of migrants, the rate being higher than second generation and third generation and the natives in Britain, anyone who's born in Britain. That's been one problem. Second problem is initially started as a government policy, Home Office policy, in the late 90s and early 2000s by sending the newcomers to certain corners, Luton, Birmingham, Glasgow, and then by default they created these areas that fail to integrate. Now, the third point is about integration. When we say there's a problem with the lack of integration and multiculturalism being an issue, it's not necessarily just the lack of integration into British society. It's lack of integration into modern, civilized Britain. The same problems we've had, historic tribal battles we've had in this country, whether it was the football hooligans, whether it was the Protestant Catholics, a number of different tribes. We've had white English people decades ago, centuries ago, but we eliminated that basically by integrating the society that we have into modern civilized society. So with the newcomers and their children and their grandchildren, you have to initially first step integrating to British society, then integrated to modern civilized society. That's where we are currently having a problem with. And you have to sort out the pace of migration, and you need to actually sort out the location, because you can't keep sending people in one area. Of course, they're going to struggle to integrate. The natives, anybody who's born here, will struggle to actually get along with someone who's not actually integrated in society either.
And it seems that the woke authorities are afraid to tackle this problem or even have a conversation about it.
The issue with that is that, on the one hand, it's classic political correctness. The second problem, unfortunately, is that some of the motives that some of these, I don't know what to call them, gang leaders, the movement leaders have had, for example, in Birmingham, the Muslim group leaders who have been complaining about certain things, they are using the same tactics as the extreme liberal lefties, cancel culture. So of course the police will find it even more awkward. So it's not just that, oh my God, well, these people seem brown, so if I attack them, I'm going to be called racist. That's not the only problem. It's because they are deplatforming people, which comes from the ideology that was promoted by the hard left, and now spreading into the Muslim community, into other communities. So the police are basically confused, which is it's not a kind of justification. They have to actually sort out, they have to get their act together, they have to treat every citizen in this country equally. If you're going to go after the lockdown protesters like that, you have to also go after the Muslim protesters, the Hindu protesters, or football hooligan protesters.
Is there any hope we can fix this, Maya?
Well, not in the short term. Unfortunately, the only way to do it is in a radical way, but you don't have to make it seem radical, because that sounds aggressive. You do have to sort out the pace of migration in this country. You have to sort out, because the problem with pace is that you can't really fully vet everybody. And this is actually in the interest of newcomers and migrants, because it's not just the natives, it's not just the white English natives that are being harmed. It's actually the generations like my mother, who was a genuine political refugee from Iran. And she's actually struggling with the newcomers from different cultures and different places who are either failing or refusing to integrate. So she's also, she feels at risk. And then you also have the others. So you have to kind of slow down the pace. You have to sort out, they make sure that the second generation, third generation rate is higher than the first rate of generation. And then you're going to have to basically make sure that it is the economic argument. You have to make sure all deprived areas are coming up. I don't want to use the Tory line of levelling up, because that makes absolutely no sense. You just have to make sure you spread prosperity across the country. This country is too London-centric, and you sort out prosperity, you improve education, you improve stability. That's the only way to do it.
Check out Maya Tuzi's most informative channel on YouTube. Well worth a watch. Coming up, another day, another attack on free speech from a US tech giant. British journalist and founder of the Daily Sceptic newspaper, which dares to criticise the narrative on COVID measures and climate change, and also the Free Speech Union. Well, Toby Young created both of those organisations. They've been effectively defunded by PayPal. Find out more shortly. Plus, Natalie Winters on whether green policies are causing the starvation of millions. It's going to be a lively end to the show. And don't forget, it's your chance to drill Dolan. GB Views at GB News. I'll be answering your questions unfiltered before the end of the programme. See you shortly.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Hey!
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Can the pledging of £2.3 billion to Ukraine be justified during a cost of living crisis at home? Alex says, Mark, your guest Tory MP Tobias Ellwood is a crazed extremist pumping out the same tired narratives in an attempt to manufacture consent for his deadly policies. He talks well and wears a nice suit, but what he says is extreme and full of untruths. However, Gary says Tobias Ellwood is spot on with what Britain is doing to support Ukraine. Your other guest has lost in his incoherent arguments. The mass immigration happening right now in this country, says Matt, means that the safe place we used to call home will no longer be there for our children. It is an act of treason. Another quick one on Ukraine, and this from Billy. Hi, Mark, in relation to this topic, if we don't spend the money on Ukraine, then we will end up having to send troops to stop Putin. I know what I would prefer. And last but not least, before we get to our next story, Roger. Dear Mark, it's a historic economic fact that no country in history has ever taxed itself to prosperity. You can catch up on my big opinion monologue, which is on the Twitter feed right now, courtesy of Ben and Paige in our digital team. Just go to @GBNews on Twitter and you'll find it there. Another day, another attack on free speech at the hands of US big tech. The popular Daily Skeptic online newspaper, which has challenged some of the orthodoxy around COVID measures and climate change, has effectively been defunded by PayPal, who will not allow payments to be made through their platform anymore. And the Free Speech Nation, which provides the services of lawyers and other experts to protect just that, has met the same fate. The founder of both organisations, Toby Young, joins me now. Hi, Toby.
Hi, Mark.
Great to have you on the show for what is a GB News exclusive. What has happened, Toby?
Well, I assumed, Mark, that when I was cancelled in 2018 and lost 5 jobs in very quick succession, one of the silver linings was that I couldn't be cancelled again. You know, there was no more dirt left to dig up on me. The offence archaeologists had trawled through everything I'd said or written dating back to 1987. And, you know, the well was dry. I thought from now on, I'm bulletproof. But not so. That turned out to be naive. Last week, I got an email from PayPal telling me that my personal PayPal account was being shut down because I had supposedly violated the company's acceptable use policy. And I thought, well, that's annoying because there's £600 in my account. I now won't be able to get it out. I won't be able to use it to make payments to my kids and so forth. But it's not the end of the world. And then a few minutes later, I got another email, also from PayPal, saying that they had shut down the account attached to the Daily Skeptic. So any of the people making regular donations to the Daily Skeptic using PayPal as their processor would no longer be able to donate. That's about a quarter of our donors. And then I got another email a few minutes later saying that PayPal had shut down the Free Speech Union's account. And about a third of our members, we have 9,500 members, about a third of our members are paying their recurring membership dues using PayPal to process those payments, have been for 2.5 years. You know, we've been paying PayPal a commission of 1.5% to do that, to perform that service for us. No warning, just out of the blue, the same message. You violated our acceptable use policy. I mean, okay, that's sort of credible in the case of one account, perhaps, but for 3 accounts to be found guilty of exactly the same crime within minutes of each other it feels like something much more sinister is going on, and that and PayPal have some form in this area, Mark. They have shut down other accounts. There's a gender-critical evolutionary biologist called Colin Wright. He was deplatformed by PayPal in June. He asked them why his account was being shut down. They said, "You want to find out? Send us a subpoena. We're not going to tell you." And that was more or less their attitude to me when I called up and said, "What's going on? What have I done? Tell me how I've violated your acceptable use policy. Give me an opportunity to correct whatever I've done wrong." No, we don't know exactly what you've done wrong. We're just shutting down your account. No right of appeal, no right to parole. You're just dead to us as far as we're concerned. I mean, it's been absolutely devastating. I've spent the last few days sort of trying to do damage control. We've written to all our members now using PayPal at the Free Speech Union and explained to them they're going to have to switch to another provider. We've contacted the donors at the Daily Skeptic. But yeah, this isn't uncommon, Mark. This is the new battlefront in the ongoing war against free speech. Financial services being withdrawn from people, not because they've said or done anything unlawful, but because they've said something a little bit unorthodox. They've criticised the lockdown policy. They've raised questions about net zero. That's now verboten as far as these companies are concerned. And the way people are being cancelled now is that they're withdrawing financial services, making it difficult for these businesses like the Daily Skeptic and the Free Speech Union to operate. It's absolutely outrageous.
Yes, this has echoes of GoFundMe, another US tech giant who suspended the campaign of an individual who was raising money for Canadian truckers who were protesting against COVID vaccine mandates.
That's right. Justin Trudeau, at his instigation, the bank accounts of people participating in the Freedom Convoy in Canada were frozen. That's how that protest was crushed by the Trudeau government. It's the kind of behavior you'd expect in the communist-run state of China, where people, because people are constantly being demonetized, having their bank accounts frozen, financial services withdrawn, because they haven't towed the Communist Party line. We sort of expect that in communist China, but that is now spreading across the West. I never thought that I'd be the victim of it. Last week, I was.
I read every newspaper every day because of my job, and I read the Daily Skeptic online, and it strikes me that you and your team are very thorough about accuracy. And if you quote statistics around COVID, for example, you normally cite official government data or peer-reviewed science.
That's right. I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory website. We bend over backwards not to publish any misinformation or disinformation. But as you know, Mark, if you say something that's slightly heretical, slightly seditious, if it challenges progressive orthodoxy, it's often described as a conspiracy theory or misinformation or disinformation, because those have become euphemisms for an opinion I disagree with. But yeah, you're right. We always cite sources. We link to all the papers we refer to. Whenever someone does fact check one of our pieces, we publish that fact check at the bottom of the piece and we reply to it. We're being treated as though we were Alex Jones. I mean, PayPal have just, I think, redrawn the Overton window. And there's certain issues now you're not allowed to express skeptical opinions about. And if what they've done to the Free Speech Union is anything to go by, you're not allowed to defend people expressing those unorthodox opinions either.
Well, it's worth remembering that you are an experienced, long-established and respected journalist, associate editor of the Spectator magazine, which I think is one of the oldest historical political periodicals in the world. Let me read a quick response from PayPal. Due to our legal and data protection obligations, we cannot comment on an individual PayPal customer's account. PayPal regularly assesses activity against our long-standing acceptable use policy and will discontinue our relationship with account holders who are found to violate our policies. Briefly, Toby, with the clock against us, what can people do? Because the Free Speech Nation is there to protect people from possibly losing their job or financial penalties simply for exercising free speech. And of course, the Daily Skeptic website is there to publish government data, some of which may not fit the narrative. Briefly, what can people do to help?
Well, the thing they can do, if they're already donating to the Daily Skeptic or they're already members of the Free Speech Union, respond to our email, set up another donation, rejoin, but not using PayPal this time. And because we're going to take a financial hit, we employ 4 people at the Daily Sceptic, 15 people at the Free Speech Union. Margins are tight. There's no fat. So if anyone wants to help us by making a donation to either the Free Speech Union or the Daily Sceptic and sticking 2 fingers up to PayPal, that would be incredibly helpful. And I can reassure everyone now that PayPal are not involved in processing any more payments on any of our websites. We're not going to have anything more to do with them.
There you go. Well, if you fancy a bit of free speech, then check out the Free Speech Nation or the Daily Sceptic website online. And, of course, ways that you can subscribe to them that don't involve PayPal are fully available. Do check it out. The reason why I say that is because I support plurality in the media. I want to have The Guardian and The Mirror and The Telegraph and The Mail. I want to have The Beeb and Sky and GB News. The more the merrier. I'm a free speech advocate. Very unfashionable these days. Let's now talk briefly about green policies that could be plunging millions into potential starvation. Let's find out more from top US investigative journalist and friend of the show, Natalie Winters. Hi, Natalie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
You're the lead investigative reporter at the National Pulse. What have you discovered in your latest piece?
Well, if there's anything we've learned from issues like COVID-19 and climate change, we've seen that the people who like to push agendas surrounding these topics likely have ulterior motives. And I think the latest example is the study that we highlighted at the National Pulse done by University College London researchers, which found that this kind of global green energy push, not wanting to use fossil fuels, wanting to use, although they're significantly less reliable and dependable, alternative energy for fuel, has actually caused a shortage of sulfuric acid. And people might not understand why this is such a critical element and component really for the world that we inhabit and our day-to-day lives. But this is a key component for fertilizer that's used for food supply to really keep the entire world full and not hungry. And what's so interesting is that researchers specifically linked this green energy push to really significant levels in terms of this element decreasing in terms of being available for use. Also, this element is very important for lithium-ion batteries. And we're talking about a deficit of nearly or several 100 million tons of sulfuric acid, which could play out very poorly in the near future.
Most certainly could. It seems an example, once again, Natalie, of eco-zealots not really doing their due diligence and not having a cost-benefit analysis of their policies.
Not at all, but I think you can almost take it somewhere darker. And that is that the people who push this green energy agenda, people like Bill Gates, the World Economic Forum, it's not that they actually believe in these ideals at heart. It's about control. And they like the idea that green energy, the push for lacking this sulfuric acid, is resulting in food shortages, potentially a lack of fertilizer, because it allows them to advance their sort of alternative eating styles. We've seen Bill Gates here in the US purchase massive amounts of farmland. And there's, of course, a big drive away from beef and animal products and towards more plant-based diets you see here going on in the US. So it really comes down to control and power. And believe me, they're doing the cost-benefit analysis. They just don't care about what the cost is to average people like you and me.
Many thanks, Natalie. A fascinating article. Do inform yourself of what they've got to say at the National Pulse. A really interesting piece there by their lead investigative reporter, Natalie Winters. It's time now for Drill Dolan. Let's have a look at this. Good evening, Mark. If you couldn't face living in this country, where would you live? Well, Andrew, that's a real challenging question, isn't it? I mean, if it wasn't England, it would be Wales, Northern Ireland or Scotland. Further abroad, well, it used to be California, but they've gone woke. So I think I'd probably just go to the Arctic, where at least I'd enjoy some freedom. Also, Drill Dolan, let's have a look. Oh, my goodness, we've got so many coming in. Is Islam a threat to Britain, says Ryan. I don't think it is. I think that Britain's always been a haven for all religions. But what we've got to do is work very focused and very attentively on integration in our country, because at the moment, it ain't working. Lots more to come. Dan Wootton is next. I'm looking after the show for Mark for this week. And Mark Steyn is back on Monday at 8, but I'll see you tomorrow at 8. Dan Wootton's next.
Hello, Mark Dolan. How are you?
Hi, Dan. I'm so well. Very excited about the show tonight. You've had an incredible 2 weeks. You've covered the Queen's funeral with such dignity and care. And I just want to congratulate you and your team.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I mean, it's been an extraordinary period, hasn't it? But it does feel very important to get back to business as usual, which is what we're going to be doing tonight with Megyn Kelly and Nigel Farage and Robert Lacey and Tom Slater as well, plus my superstar panel. So we're all back as normal.
Best journalist in the country, Dan Wootton, live at 9 o'clock. You won't want to miss a second. Here's the weather.
Hello, a fairly quiet spell of weather over the next couple of days for most of us. Quite a lot of cloud around, but it will be dry for most through the rest of this evening and overnight, although with one exception, which is the far northwest of Scotland. That's because we have this weather front close by. Otherwise, though, high pressure in charge of our weather, keeping things fairly quiet and settled for the next few days. So through this evening and overnight, quite a lot of cloud around, but there certainly will be some breaks in that cloud. That, though, will allow a little bit of mist and fog to develop in places by the end of the night. And still in the far northwest of Scotland, we have this weather front bringing thicker cloud with outbreaks of rain and also some quite brisk winds. So we start Wednesday on a reasonably mild note in the towns and cities, but it will be a little bit chilly in the countryside. Some brightness around first thing, especially once any mist and fog patches melt away. But there will be variable amounts of cloud around through the course of Wednesday. A little bit of brightness here and there, but also the chance that the cloud could just about be thick enough to produce the odd drizzly shower. And still we have this thicker cloud in the northwest, and that will gradually start to move its way southeastwards later on Wednesday, but more especially through Thursday and Friday. So overnight Wednesday, we can see that weather front continuing to make very slow progress south and east.